Hello there, and welcome to another Commodore 64 playthrough. This time we're going to play the arcade classic Space Harrier. So let's get some music going. So take yourself back to the mid-80s when arcades were all the rage, and you would go to the arcade and you would, put your 10p in and play some fantastic games. And front and center was usually this game, Space Harrier. You'd be sat in a huge sarcophagus of an arcade machine, and you'd be rocked around, and you'd be seeing these fantastically wonderful color graphics, and it was such an experience. So then what happened was that, as happens with most arcade games, is that they then become ripe for conversion to the home computer of the day. So Commodore 64, Amstrad, Spectrum, BBC, you name it. And because this game was so popular in the arcades, they couldn't resist but convert it for the Commodore 64 and other machines, without realizing that there's a big difference between a piece of custom hardware like an arcade machine and 16 colors, 64K of RAM, a 1 megahertz CPU, and so on. And so what happened? You ended up with a game where kids like me would buy it thinking, oh wow, it would just be like being at the arcade. And then you got it home and you waited your half an hour for it to load, and then you saw this. So this is Space Harrier. The idea is pretty straightforward. You shoot things. Some things shoot back at you. Some things you can't shoot. Some things are indestructible. Some things kill you if you hit them. There's not exactly a great degree of sophistication with this. I must be honest, the more I play it, the more I'm actually admiring the programming behind it, because to actually get this level of speed and scrolling on C64 is not bad, because although Commodore had sprites, Commodore didn't really have much in the way of code for scrolling. So to get the background scrolling and moving up and down is not actually a bad exercise in terms of coding. You had 8 sprites at a time. Now, as you can see from this game, you've got more than 8 sprites going on. And how they did that, they used something called a raster interrupt, which is basically a clever way of getting more than 8 sprites on a screen. You could get up to 256 sprites if you were going to, take it to the theoretical limit. And as you can see by the actual screen size, we are not full screen. We're about sort of 2/3 of the screen, so that saves a bit on memory and speed. There's some clever things there. But I mean, as for the gameplay, you're just shooting things. There's no real, rules to it. If you hit 3, you get a free life. If you, secret rooms, any sort of sophistication like that, you're just basically hitting things. And the graphics are just, I suppose, functional would be the most polite thing to say. I do remember it when I was reading contemporary magazines, when they were reviewing this. They were getting things like 16% out of 100. It didn't set the author's worlds alight playing things like this. And to be honest, it's probably actually aged not as bad, because people were obviously comparing this to the arcade game, whereas now I'm comparing this to other Commodore 64 games, and it's not, it's not that bad. It was only really until we got into the realms of, say, Turrican, where you saw really slick, agile games. But Turrican was playing on its own rules. Turrican was a unique game, whereas this is a conversion, so therefore there are certain things it had to follow. And I think that's the biggest fault of this game, is it's actually trying to be another game. It's trying to be like an arcade game without trying to be a Commodore 64 game. But fair play, I'd imagine that Elite probably made a lot of money off this, and it's not without merit. But unless you're an absolute die-hard shoot 'em up arcade fan, which I'm not, I'm not quite sure after a couple of goes what sort of level of enjoyment you get. Anyway, I'm just gonna wait for me to die. There we go, I die. No, I got one more life, sorry. You can't shoot anything on this level because everything's indestructible, which is handy. Put myself out of my misery. I think I'll just commit suicide. There we go. So, and you get the old arcade sort of screen. I mean, this was always the fun part when you went to the arcade, was getting your name on the board. But obviously, with a Commodore 64 game, it's not the same because as soon as you restart it, you have a blank screen. The music's good for this game. I mean, don't get me wrong. The soundtrack is a lot of fans, and I've heard lots of remixes of it. But yeah, it just is what it is, really. So I hope you enjoy that. I happen to have the top score, even though I'm the worst game player in the world. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. Any questions, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.